Hello guys, welcome to my channel. The less is more. So today we will discuss an editorial from Indian Express, and today the topic is little different and it is international relations. Okay, and we let's start the editorial directly. The title is Biden's New Geo Economics and it has been written by the C. Raja Mohan. Okay, it's a very best, or you can say expert in political analyst. Okay, so US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan's visit to Delhi this week is expected to finalize the agreements that are to be unveiled during Prime Minister Narendra Modi's state visit to Washington on June 22. So it is about finalizing agreement. Okay, during the PM's state visit to Washington. The public focus is on major deals to facilitate significant defense industrial collaboration and high technology trade between the two nations. So the focus is on defense industrial collaboration and high technology trade between two nations. Indian policy communities must devote serious attention to the ambitious US plans to restructure the global economy away from the orthodoxies of the last 4 decades. There is no better interlocutor than Sullivan to offer insight into the new economic grand strategy of the US that questions the globalization dogma. As the key advisor to Joe Biden on both domestic and foreign policy issues during the 2020 presidential campaign, Sullivan, then based at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Washington, helped produce a report on making US foreign policy work better for the middle class. That report has become the ideological foundation for Biden's commitment to ensuring that foreign economic policy serves the interest of the American people. The focus on economic security has become the keystone for the Biden effort to engineer sweeping changes in Washington's approach toward domestic manufacturing, international trade, technology coalitions, climate change, and multilateral development institution. So the focus is on economic security. It's a keystone for Biden administration. This geo-economic agenda is deeply tied to the Biden administration's geopolitical priorities, centered on competing with China, rebooting traditional allies, building new partnerships, and constructing new regional and global coalitions. The major allies of the US, including Britain, the European Union, and Japan, also Washington's main economic partners and members of the G7 group, are engaged in intense internal debates on Biden's new geoeconomics and negotiating with Washington in addressing its consequences. The discourse in Delhi, however, remains focused narrowly on geopolitics. What Delhi needs is a thorough discussion on Washington's new geoeconomics that promise not only to radically change the international order but also to create pathways to re engineer the Indian economy and open the door for the modernization of its technological toolkit. As the US brings its geoeconomics in alignment with its geopolitics, Delhi needs its business leaders, technological entrepreneurs, and economic policymakers to weigh in a lot more on the future of bilateral relation with Washington. So here the author is saying that in Delhi the focus is narrowly on geopolitics only and not on the geoeconomics, whereas the US is going for geoeconomics in the new Biden's economic policy, right? So the author is suggesting that as the US brings geoeconomics in alignment with its geopolitics, Delhi needs its business leaders, technological entrepreneurs, and economic policymakers to weigh in a lot more on the future of bilateral relations. Okay, so the focus is not only on geopolitics, okay, that is India, China. What is geopolitics, political angle in this? US wants to counter China, but it cannot do it alone. That's why US needs India to counter China in the Indian Ocean. Okay, so it is called geopolitics. But what if we engage the geoeconomics in the in the bilateral relation between US and India? See, the relation is sometimes only geopolitical, okay, but if we have to make it more strategic, more deepen, then we have to engage it more different sphere, okay. So after the polity, it becomes the economy, right? Like if we take the example of our neighbor, so just because of they are the neighbor of us, we have a little relation with them, like we can say good morning and all, okay. Then comes the we get a little economic over the relation, or we can add the economic sphere, right? Or we can use the barter system, right? Or we can invite for a food and anything, right? So the relation gets deepened through economy, okay. And after the economy, if the ties are deepening even with the economy, then if we have to go more deep in the relation, then comes the cultural sphere. So if we take the example of two homes, then how the culturals or the culture can deepen the ties? So it can be a intermarriage, okay. So the bride of one house and the groom of one house can marry together of the neighboring countries or neighboring homes. So on the cultural sphere, the ties get more deepen, right? And this is happen even in the domestic politics as well. It's not a new, just it is at the global level, right? So right now US is engaging with us in the geo-economic sphere. That's why there is a, I mean, the discussion is going on the defense industrial collaboration and high technology trade, right? And for the cultural relation, the Indian diaspora in the US play the crucial role. So let's go ahead. Thanks to the strong support from successive prime minister and the sustained efforts of its diplomatic corps, Delhi and Washington have largely overcome the geopolitical divergence that shaped their bilateral relation in the second half of the 20th century. So because of the successive prime minister and sustained efforts, the Delhi and Washington come closer than what they were before in the middle of the 20th century. The story of the India-US relation over the last 3 decades is about the two governments defying the entrenched skepticism within the strategic communities in both capitals. Consider India's historic hesitation, which Prime Minister Narendra Modi publicly discarded when he last addressed the joint session of the US Congress 7 summers ago. Over the last 3 decades in engaging the US, one hesitation related to India's concern about America's relations with Pakistan. The conventional wisdom in Delhi until recently was that the US will never abandon Pakistan. Today, Islamabad and Rawalpindi are marginal to the American geopolitical calculus. So, until today or until the some years, the conventional wisdom in Delhi was that US will never abandon Pakistan, right? But today we can see the Islamabad and the Rawalpindi. Actually, Rawalpindi is the headquarter of the military of Pakistan. So they are very marginal to the American geopolitical calculus. So we can get little bit closer with US, and otherwise there is a quote of the internet this political thinker of the US, that is a well known, that is Henry Kissinger. He used to say that the US has no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. US has only the interest, right? So the US cannot be trusted blindly. That is what the conventional wisdom of the Delhi till today. In the 1990s, the Indian security establishment was deeply concerned about the US meddling in Kashmir by the Bill Clinton administration. Clinton's successor, George Washington Bush, took Kashmir off the agenda by ending the US activism on the question. The nuclear dispute with the US was considered unresolvable since the early 1970s. George Washington Bush moved decisively in 2005 to alter the US domestic law on non-proliferation and push the international community to change the global rules of nuclear commerce in favor of India. It was Delhi, then ruled by the UPA, that got its political knickers into a twist on how to deal with a nuclear offer that it could not say no to. The last few years under Donald Trump and Biden have left no room for India's long-standing resentment against the US partnership with China. The US now has a bipartisan consensus on limiting the possibilities for Beijing's hegemony over Asia. This has coincided with the growing Chinese threat to India and facilitated a convergence of interest between Delhi and Washington on stabilizing the Asian balance of power. To add a final twist to the new geopolitical bonhomie, the US is eager to assist and benefit from India's long pressing need to reduce its massive reliance on Russian weapons. If PM Modi has insisted on reducing weapons imports and making them at home, Biden is now offering US technology and capital to expand and modernize India's defense industrial base. The challenge for Delhi and Washington now is to translate the new geopolitical convergence into concrete outcomes. NSA Sullivan's visit to Delhi is about sorting out the details of a new strategic compact and overcoming regulatory bottlenecks and getting their large bureaucracies to work together. Looking back over the last 75 years, the problem has never been the lack of room for India-US geopolitical cooperation. The trouble on the Indian side at least was the elite's default ideological position. So this was the challenges we can consider. Okay, that why before these many years the US and India was not becoming a very strategic partner and were bit skeptical in deepening the ties with US because there was a ideological position, okay, default ideological position from the elite class or the this political class, okay. Persistent pessimism about the possibilities with the US, optimism about partnering China, and a complacent over dependence on Russia. So these three was the challenges or this ideological position, okay. Pessimism with US, optimism with China, and complacent over dependence on Russia. The current geopolitical churn has made this default mode unsustainable. The real challenge and opportunity today for India and the US lie elsewhere, in seizing the possibilities for geo-economic collaboration that have been opened up by the Biden administration. 3 decades ago, when India embarked on its economic reforms, the so-called Washington consensus on globalization was a given. The only question was about the pace and sequence of measures in India's adaptation. So the question was about the pace, that how pace or how fast the India can bring these reforms, okay, and sequence of measure in India's adaptation, and how sequentially India is adopting these measures and being adapted to it. Today the US is seeking India's cooperation in restructuring the global economic order and making the world less vulnerable to Chinese pressures. So we have seen during the COVID-19 pandemic that the over dependence on the China for supply chain on the in the global value chain was very dangerous for the whole world. That's why the US is seeking that US is seeking India's cooperation to diversify and reform the global economic structure or the global economic order. So for making the world less vulnerable to Chinese pressure. Okay. Unlike at the turn of the 1990s, India today is the world's fifth largest economy entity and poised to become the third largest in a decade. For the first time since independence, Delhi is in a position to shape global economic order. The current juncture could be seen as a PM Modi's Deng Xiaoping moment. So here the author is comparing this juncture as a PM Modi's Deng Xiaoping moment for the it was in the China, right? There was a Mao Zedong until I think 1970. After the independence of China in 1949 or 50, the rule was on Mao Zedong. After the Mao Zedong, it was Deng Xiaoping who bring the much needed reform in the economy, and that 30 years of Deng Xiaoping placed the China above the all over the world and can influence the US. Okay. So that's why the author is comparing PM Modi as the Deng Xiaoping moment. Okay. Building on the geopolitical convergence with the US in the late 1970s and early 80s, Deng rapidly transformed the Chinese economy by gaining access to Western capital, technology and markets and made his country the second most powerful nation. So here what happened is, building on geopolitical convergence with US in late 1970s and early 80s, what happened? Deng rapidly transformed the Chinese economy by gaining access to Western capital. So it was like China has gained much from the Western capital, Western technology, right? And it the pace was very high, or at the full speed that Deng Xiaoping has transformed the country and the Chinese economy, right? So here we can say, or we can compare an analogy that you are the average of the 5 persons around you. Like if you become very nearer to the very powerful nation, you can become the second one, right? And this is what happened in the China during 1970s and 80s, when the US and China's relation get deepened over the economy, right? He reminded us that geopolitics is not an end itself, but an instrument to build national prosperity that is at the root of all power. So the geopolitics is not an end, it's not the like the goal or the destination, but it's the foundation for building the, or the you can say the instrument. Okay, geopolitics is the instrument to get the geo-economic or to build the national prosperity, right? That is the root of all power. So if you want a power, so one should have a prosperity, right? So the nation can have a power when the whole nation is prosperous, right? China's current leader Xi Jinping, in contrast, offers a lesson in the dangers of geopolitical and ideological overreach. Converting the India-US geo-economic possibilities into positive outcomes. So, converting these India-US geo-economic possibilities into positive outcomes will demand the kind of hard work that went into bridging the geopolitical divide between Delhi and Washington over the last 3 decades. So there was a divide between Delhi and US, geopolitical divide, and it takes almost 3 decades to fill that gap. Okay. India's business elites and policymakers, however, need to move a lot faster amid the rapid changes unfolding in the global economic order. The engagement with NSA Sullivan this week is a good moment to start. Okay. So it would have these US geo-economic possibilities would have positive outcomes will demand what? The kind of hard work, okay, that went for bridging this geopolitical gap between US and China. And it, so if there is a gap in the any relation, it takes a lot more time to bridge, okay, bridge that gap and fulfill that gap. So for that, the hard work required from the business elite and policy makers, right, to cooperate each other during the hard times. And this is how the relation gets deeper. So we have seen in this editorial that right now the economic policy of the US is changing under the US administration, okay, and the main focus is on changing the economic order of the world, right. And for that US needs India, because it US want to counter the China over the over dependence on the supply chain and the value chain that comes from the China. So that the US can make the world more less vulnerable. Okay, and we have also seen the some historical stance of the India US relations, that how it was before in the last 3 to 4 decades, and then the positive outcomes of the nuclear deal, that how the this George Bush administration has changed its law, domestic law. Otherwise, if India wants to have a civil nuclear deal or the nuclear this uranium for civilian use, the US cannot grant until and unless the Delhi has signed the NPT, that is non-proliferation treaty, okay. But we have never signed this non-proliferation treaty, but still we want the nuclear power plant and the nuclear technology as well as the uranium, right, for the civilian use. So the US has made an exceptions in the law, and it has convinced the other world powers, major powers like France, Australia, Japan, UK, that we can go ahead with the India with this US Indo US civil nuclear deal, and there is no any danger, as India has promised to use it for only civilian use, right, and not for this. But US wants us to sign the NPT, that is non-proliferation treaty, which we can never do, right, because we have dangers from northeast and northwest, like Pakistan and China both have the nuclear weapons. So we cannot assure US that we will never use nuclear weapons, but we have assured that we will not use in the first instance. So India has this policy of no first use policy when it comes to using nuclear weapons, okay. So right now the US wants India to get closer with US, so that's why US is offering high defense technology, defense industrial collaboration and high technology partnership, okay, with India. So it is offering the technology transfer to India, who US. So we can make the defense equipment at the India only, which can be you can say a great investment in the India, and it would have a domino effect or the multiplier effect for the employment opportunities, job creation, economic growth, right. So That's why the US is offering us, and we can build on that. We can also make our India more prosperous with that kind of technology which US is offering us. And so this US Sullivan's visit was about to finalize that draft agreement before the PM Modi state visit on the 22nd June, right, to Washington. Okay, and we have also some challenges that why we cannot come closer to the US, because US has the good relation with Pakistan in the 20th century or in the 90s, right? And we want to we are optimistic with China, right, for the partnership, and we were over complacent or complacent to over dependence on Russia. So we were over dependent on Russia. So that's why the closer or the getting closer with the US was being little bit pessimistic, right? So this was for today, guys. I hope you would be understanding, and please let me know if you have any doubt or query. Please let me know in the comment section. Okay, and please let me know if you want any other kind of discussion or the topic that are widely covered in the current affairs to be discussed. Okay, till then, bye bye, signing off for the day.